Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. As always, I'm happy to be back with you guys this week. Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for the day. Grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, but most certainly grab your wine if it's the evening. Either way, let's get into it. Now, we all know that life is about choices. Now, some are small and forgettable, like what are you going to wear on Friday night? Or they could be as simple as figuring out what are you going to cook for dinner? Because every day you have to ask yourself that question. Or it could simply be which route am I going to take to work today to avoid that heavy traffic? Others are life altering, though. They can build futures, change destinies, or destroy everything in a single moment. The truth is, one decision made in anger, pride, jealousy, or fear can change the entire trajectory of someone's life. And often it's not just one life affected. Children, parents, entire families, and communities will never be the same again based on a decision. Today's episode is not just a story of crime, it's a story of a choice that turned a loving mother into a convicted murderer, a choice that left four children without the one person they looked to for stability, and another family grieving a life violently taken. This is the case of Keisha Jones, a woman who, by all accounts, was nurturing, loving, and devoted to her family until one night, one argument, one moment of rage ended in tragedy. Before the headlines, before the trial, before the world labeled her a murderer, well, Keisha, she was just a girl. Keisha Jones was born in the heart of Philadelphia in 1981. Her mother was only 15 years old when she gave birth, a child raising a child. The odds were stacked against them from the beginning, but rather than turn cold or resentful, Keisha's mother poured love into her. She nicknamed her Precious because indeed that is what she was to her mother. Her mother talked about the bond that they developed over her childhood and emphasized that they were truly best friends. Keisha, she grew up determined, strong willed, nurturing, and fiercely protective of people she loved. By the time she was a teenager, Keisha wasn't just helping with household responsibility. She was raising her siblings. She was a second mother in a home where childhood seemed to end early. Now, I want to take a moment to just think about the scenario in which Keisha grew up in. When a child becomes the caretaker, when they grow up too fast, it shapes everything about their life, how they love, how they fight, and how they cope with conflict. Keisha was responsible, no doubt, dependable, but she was also carrying the weight of adulthood before she was emotionally ready. And I think this tends to be the plight of most firstborns when they have other siblings. Parents tend to depend on them way more than what they should. And let me know your thoughts about that and maybe how it even shaped Keisha after we journey through her life. At 16 years old, Keisha sat her mother down and shared life changing news. She was pregnant. Her mother, who had walked the exact same path, was heartbroken. She wanted stability for Keisha, education, a future. And Keisha promised that she would return to school after giving birth, but we all know life had other plans. She had a second child soon after with her boyfriend, James Hayes, and James and Keisha were committed to raising their children together. James later said and described Keisha as an excellent mother, that her children was her entire life. Now, they went through various ups and downs, financial struggles, stress, and just the instability of life. But Keisha made sure her children were in extracurricular activities, skating, going to the park, school events, anything she could do to provide her children a better life. You could bet your bottom dollar that Keisha was going to do that. So, in many ways, Keisha was inspiring. She was a young mother at the age of 21, trying to devote her life to raising her children and giving them everything they needed, plus more. But Keisha was still young. I mean, she was 21 years old, and like 21-year-olds, she liked to party, to go out, and to have a good time. She was the fun person in her family. But she also was dependable, and I think that should be highlighted. Many people said that if you needed anything, Keisha was always the person you could turn to and call. Her siblings, her friends, her family. She was the person that you could call at 3 a.m. for help, and you could guarantee that Keisha was going to come through for you. After 6 years, however, Keisha and James decided to end their romantic relationship, and it wasn't nasty or contentious. There were no custody battles or restraining orders. They became model co parents. They remained friends, they respected one another, and that's important to remember because it tells us who Keisha was before everything went wrong. In 2004, everything changed when Keisha was introduced to 20-year-old Tyrone Taylor. It was instant chemistry. They traveled together, partied together, posted photos on social media. Tyrone even stepped into a secondary father role for James and Keisha's two older children. And James, the ex, said he genuinely got along with Tyrone. Talk about a blended family that was working and working effectively. Keisha and Tyrone went on to have two more children together, one in 2005 and another in 2007. So it's by no surprise that in 2008, during a fun weekend in Las Vegas, they decided to get married. And when they came back home and told the family about their news, everyone was enthusiastic. Tyrone seamlessly fit into Keisha's family. I mean, he even fit in with James's family. Tyrone got along with James's mother. It was the perfect family, handcrafted, and everybody got along. By 2011, Keisha and Tyrone had four children in a home filled with laughter. But this is where we see the core of our story begin to shift. What looked like a dream family from the outside was beginning to crack from within. Was a long weekend after Thanksgiving in 2011. Keisha and Tyrone had dropped all four children off with James Hayes, Keisha's ex and father of her first two kids. Now, this wasn't unusual. They were that family, the one people pointed to and said, "See, co parenting can work." That Saturday, November 27th, 2011, Keisha and Tyrone slept in late. They did laundry, they relaxed. By evening, Keisha began getting ready for the night out with her husband. On the surface, everything seems normal, right? Everything I just described to you about the weekend. But as we've seen in so many cases before, the line between normal and tragedy, well, it is a thin line. According to witness accounts, Keisha met up with her cousin, Tamar Stanford, along with other friends, and her and Tyrone decided to split their bar hopping activities. So he went to a bar and she did too. Separately, they enjoyed the night. They were drinking, dancing, laughing. And later that night, Tyrone joined them. And according to Keisha's cousin, Tamar, who was with them the entire night, everyone seemed to be having a time until suddenly, well, they weren't. An argument broke out between Keisha and Tyrone. It started verbally right outside of the club and continued when they got in the car. It was just a verbal altercation, heated words, accusations, and reportedly, we find out that it was because Keisha was speaking to another man. The tension continued as they headed home. At some point, Tyrone had enough of the arguing and he pulled the SUV over onto a street not far from where his parents lived. He got out and started walking. He didn't slam the door, he wasn't violent, just walked. And this is the moment where a choice was made. Keisha moved from the passenger seat to the driver's seat. Her cousin Tamara was in the back. Tamara would later testify that she looked down at her phone And she never saw Keisha's face in that moment. She only felt the shift, the engine revving, the sudden thrust. The SUV jumped the curb, and in seconds, Tyrone Taylor, 28-year-old father of two, was pinned against a concrete wall. He died instantly. Philadelphia PD received a call that a vehicle struck a pedestrian in South Philly. When police arrived, Keisha was found kneeling on shattered glass, cradling Tyrone in her lap, screaming that it was an accident. She suffered only minor injuries that she sustained from kneeling on the shattered glass after the crash. Police transported Police transported her to the hospital first and then straight to the Philadelphia Homicide Unit where she would give her formal statement. Now, when the police viewed the accident scene, it did not appear to be a typical accident. There were no skid marks present to suggest that the driver attempted to brake. Notably, Tyrone was not located on the street. He was pinned between the vehicle and the concrete wall. The SUV sustained significant damage, and the deployment of the airbags suggested that the vehicle was traveling at a high rate of speed. While detectives attempted to make sense of the situation, they had an eyewitness on scene, Tamar Stanford, who was in the backseat of the vehicle and had witnessed everything. Tamar told investigators the same story that Keisha would later tell, that yes, they had been drinking. Yes, there was a heated argument, although during the time, she didn't say exactly what the argument was about. And that's important for later. She also said Tyrone got out of the car to walk away. And yes, Keisha got into the driver's seat. Tamar said Tyrone got out because he was exhausted by all of the fighting and wanted to let cooler heads reside by simply walking to his parents' house that was a block away from where he pulled the car over. When Keisha gave her statement to investigators, she told them that she told Tyrone to get out. And when he did what she told him to, that's when she became enraged. Now, this is the differing detail between Tamar and Keisha's story. Now, that may seem like a small detail, but in court, motive often hides in small details. Keisha claims that she only got in the driver's seat because she was trying to follow him, but she was wearing heels that night as they had recently went to the club, and her heels slipped, and instead of hitting the brake, she hit the gas instead and lost control of the car. She claimed she never saw him until Tamar shouted, "You hit him." And that's when she put the car in reverse and got out of the car to cradle her husband. But there was a problem in her account. Now, police canvassed the scene the next day while retrieving Keisha's formal statement. They were searching for witnesses or surveillance cameras that could confirm or refute Keisha or Tamar's account. And they found one across the street at a neighborhood deli and another business. So they had two cameras on that caught the entire incident. The footage was grainy. It was nighttime. One camera was wide and the other camera zoomed in on the incident. Although grainy, it was clear enough to see that Tyrone steps out of the SUV. He walks in front of the vehicle, crossing slightly to the left. The SUV turns sharply 90 degrees toward Tyrone. It accelerates. Tyrone tries to run, but he's struck, carried on the hood, and then crushed as the vehicle hits the concrete wall. At no point does the SUV correct. At no point do we see brake lights. There is no sign of losing control. To the investigators, this seemed intentional. As a result, Keisha Jones was apprehended and formally charged with first-degree murder, an offense in Philadelphia for which bail is not permitted. Now, blood tests would later reveal that Keisha's blood alcohol level was above the legal limit. While this fact might have supported the accident theory that she claimed happened, it kind of made things worse, to be honest, because intoxication is not a legal defense for murdering someone. Keisha had a hard time coming to grips with the fact that she murdered her husband. They had to tell her several times when she gave her formal statement of what happened that he was dead. And all she kept emphasizing is that it was an accident. She was visibly upset and crying. But the fact remained that Tyrone was dead, and he was dead because of her actions. On January 25th, 2012, when Keisha appeared in court, Tyrone's family also came. They believed that she should be held responsible for his death, accident or not. Keisha stated in open court that it was a tragic accident, and her attorneys argued she was not guilty of murder, citing her actions afterwards and her intoxication at the time. Her legal team faced some challenges though, due to the video footage that would be presented if she decided to go to trial. And they knew that was going to be damning and that was going to be an uphill battle. So Keisha's attorneys approached prosecutors to discuss a possible plea agreement, seeking to reduce the charge from first-degree murder to voluntary manslaughter. Prosecutors aimed to pursue third-degree murder charges. They said, we're not going to drop it to voluntary manslaughter. We are going to drop it to third-degree murder. Third-degree murder charges in Philadelphia entails that you were trying to cause harm, but it ultimately resulted in death. And that's why they agreed to a third-degree charge instead of the voluntary manslaughter. Now, acceptance of this plea would result in a sentence between 10 to 15 years rather than life imprisonment if she decided to take it to trial. And in consideration of her 4 children, she felt that she needed to not take the 10 to 15. Instead, she opted against the deal and proceeded to trial, risking a life sentence. In October of 2012, Keisha's trial began. The courtroom was packed. 2 families sat on opposite sides, one seeking justice for Tyrone, the other desperately hoping to save Keisha from life in prison. The prosecution argued that this was not an accident, it was a choice, a deliberate act of rage fueled by jealousy and alcohol. Now, the defense argued that Keisha was intoxicated. They did not want to debate the facts, but she was emotional. She had made a tragic mistake. It wasn't premeditated. And here's where the case took a devastating turn. Keisha's cousin, Tamar Stanford, testified against her. She was the eyewitness. She described the argument, Tyrone leaving the vehicle, and Keisha moving into the driver's seat. She also added a new reason for the argument, stating that Tyrone believed Keisha was cheating and suggested that both parties may have been involved in infidelity. Now, this was damning because if indeed they were arguing about infidelity on both sides, that does something for the prosecution in terms of saying that it was premeditated, because based on the argument that she had leaving the club in the car, that since they were arguing about infidelity and both of them cheating, that gives more credence to that anger and jealousy and rage that the prosecution alleged that fueled her to run over her husband. But what was even more damning was what the prosecutors played after Keisha's testimony. They played that surveillance footage. And there are moments in trials where everything shifts, where you can feel the verdict begin to form in the minds of the jury. And this was that moment. The footage showed the SUV making a clear, deliberate turn toward Tyrone. Prosecutors pointed out that there was no correction, no hesitation, only acceleration. When the defense had an opportunity to bring their evidence to the table, they brought a toxicologist expert on the stand who testified that Keisha had a blood alcohol level of 0.01%, which is far beyond the legal limit. And he testified that alcohol impairs your judgment, your reaction time, and your motor skills. And this was credence to the fact that when she got behind the wheel, that it wasn't crazy that she could have lost control of the vehicle because she was so intoxicated that these things tend to happen when you are intoxicated. On the third day of trial, Keisha Jones did take the stand. She held a photo of Tyrone to her chest. She broke down multiple times on the stand, sobbing as she professed her love for her husband. She insisted through tears that she never wanted to hurt him, that it was simply an accident. But the prosecution countered. They said that it was a split second of rage and it was still intent. Under Pennsylvania law, first-degree murder doesn't require planning. It only requires that in the moment, you intended the action that caused the death. And driving a 2-ton vehicle straight into another human being fulfilled that requirement. In the closing arguments, the prosecution did something that seemed to hit home with the jury. You know how they had that toxicologist for the defense? Well, the prosecution alleged that although being intoxicated does affect your reaction time, it does affect your motor skills and your judgment, it also affects your inhibitions, and your inhibitions come down. And they believe that in that time that she was intoxicated and arguing with her husband, that her inhibitions fell down and the true monstrous nature of Keisha came out, and she purposefully ran Tyrone over. On October 26, 2012, the jury returned its verdict. The courtroom fell silent. Was this a tragic accident or an intentional murder? Verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Keisha rocked back and forth, screaming, my children, but it was done. The judge was required to sentence Keisha to life in prison without the possibility of parole, because that is a mandatory sentence in Pennsylvania for first-degree murder. In the courtroom, Tyrone's family, after Keisha's family went out, let out an audible gasp that they were happy and began to clap. But Tyrone's father told them to quiet down, as he said that nobody won in this situation. Tyrone was dead, and Tyrone's 2 children would never have their mother in their lives again. Keisha went on to file an appeal. She claimed errors in trial, and she claimed ineffective counsel. But the appellate court upheld her conviction, ruling the evidence proved intent, her actions were deliberate, her conviction would stand. Tyrone's father gained custody of his 2 grandchildren from the marriage, and James Hayes, Keisha's ex, took custody of the children they shared. 4 children now growing up without their mother and without their father. And that brings us back to where we began. One moment, one choice, one split second that changed everything. Takeaway. Today's story is not about a monster. I don't believe that Keisha Jones was a monster. I believe it's simply about a moment where love, pride, anger, alcohol, and emotion collided. And in a split second, a choice was made that could never be undone. Keisha wasn't a career criminal. She wasn't violent by nature. She was a mother a provider, someone who loved hard, maybe too hard. But that night, her emotions drove that car, and four children lost their entire world in an instant. We often think tragedies begin with evil, but sometimes they begin with heartbreak, with a wound left unhealed, with a choice made in the heat of anger. This case forces us to ask ourselves, when we are hurt, when we are angry, when we feel betrayed, what do we become in that moment? Because anger is temporary, but the consequences can last a lifetime. And it is important to reflect on cases like this and some of the other cases we have highlighted in the past where people's choices, where we're not dealing with career criminals, we're not dealing with the monsters that lurk behind your door. It's the people that are normal, ordinary people like you and I that lose control from temporary emotion. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about Keisha, her upbringing, and what ultimately led her to make the decision that she made. I also want to let you know I did a review of The Perfect Neighbor on Netflix. And if you have not watched, I strongly suggest that you guys go and watch it. It's about an hour and a half. It's worth your time. And it's told in a way that true crime is not usually depicted. So I heavily suggest that you guys do so. If you've already watched it, head over to our Facebook or to our Instagram and tell me what you think about the documentary. What were your thoughts afterwards? Until next time, friends, this is Murder in the Black.